Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats? Can you come in if you're coming in for this session? We're going to start bang on 2 p.m.
One of my colleagues first time, but she's out of the office now recently. She used to be a postdoc in Portugal. Now she's in the US. Even the slides. Not bigger and bigger.
So, welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch. For this session, which is Earth Observations in Support of the Sendai Framework, we will not have a keynote speaker because we had Mami Mizutori, who delivered the opening plenary keynote address. So we'll be going straight to the panelists. One quick announcement is that in the coming weeks, there will be a call around disaster resilience from the Belmont Forum. So that will be on Slido later on this afternoon, and you'll be able to see the information about that and click to the website. So this session is being moderated by Professor Toshio Koike. He's the Executive Director of the International Centre for Water Hazard and Risk Management under the auspices of UNESCO, and the centre is known as iCharm. He's spent almost 40 years in academia, notably at the University of Tokyo, where he is now Emeritus Professor. His areas of expertise include the water cycle and climate sciences and their application to water-related disaster risk reduction. So I will now hand over to Professor Koike and leave it in your capable hands.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very excellent panelists in this session. One from government, the Dr. Renato Solidam, and the Secretary for the Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation, and Department of the Science and Technology, Government of Philippines. And other one from the NGO, Dr. Nate Smith the director of the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, HOT, Portugal. So we have the governmental representative and NGO representative at first, and then has two the panelists from academia. Professor Jacqueline Pereira. She's a professor and a principal research fellow of SIDPURI, the University of Kebangsaan, Malaysia. She's also the vice chair of the IPCC Working Group 2. And another panelist from academia, the Professor Lin Hui, professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So we are very happy to have a presentation from 4 panelists. Before that, as Stephen mentioned, we had a keynote lecture from the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for disaster risk reduction, the Ms. Tori. We would review of her the message at first, and then we would identify the target of this panel discussion. So the number of the human loss is now not increasing, but somehow decreasing. This is a very good signal. However, the number of the reported natural disaster rapidly increasing, and also the estimated the economic damage caused by the disaster are also increasing. In this way, we say the disaster damage increasing something, but refer to the Sendai Framework. Sendai Framework identify 7 global targets. It say substantially reduce the global disaster mortality and substantially reduce the number of affected people. Substantially. Why we had to use the substantially? Because we didn't have any quantitative number at that moment. So that's why we have to say in this way. And with regard to the economic loss, just reduce the direct disaster economic loss. So that is our status. So then, just after the Sendai Framework, the adoption, we developed organized the open-end intergovernmental expert working group, OIEWG, and we developed the minimum standard for data statistics analysis. And it was submitted to UN General Assembly, and it was endorsed in February 2017. So that is our status. And the Ms. Tori proposed to us a 3-fold application for disaster-related Earth observation data yesterday. Firstly, she requested us to assist a country to assess current risk trend with a view to determining the most pressing priority. Why? Sendai Framework requests the country to submit national and local strategy for DRR by 2020. This is really urgent task. So the Earth observation community is now requested to support the country for assessing the current risk trend. Secondly, she requested us to fill gaps which currently exist in official statistics. So, as I mentioned, we don't have such kind of statistics in all countries. And she requested us to help provide a comprehensive picture of the status of implementation of Sendai Framework, and of course the SDG and Paris Agreement. And she also introduced a new activity that is the UNISDR GRAPH, a Global Risk Assessment Framework. So she requested us to contribute to this framework. What is the GRAPH? That is an interactive platform driven by the needs from national or local government to the cities, towns, and villages. And this platform should be developed by the user-centric and co-development approach. So we received these 3 requests from her yesterday. I would ask our panelists to respond to these 3 requests. After your presentation, we would discuss about this one. Okay? And we need to consider in which part of the disaster risk management we can contribute to, or what kind of the gap to be filled. Sendai Framework identify 4 priorities for action. The priority 1, understanding the disaster risk, not the understanding of the scientist or the academia, but also the government and also the people. Priority 2 is strengthen the disaster risk governance to manage the disaster risk. That is the second priority. Third one, encourage the investment in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And fourthly, it identified the enhancement of the disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So I would ask our panelists to introduce your experiences or your request to the Earth observation with regard to these 4 priorities. And the disaster happened, and then society function reduced. To reduce such a function, we take action for evacuation, and the loss is mitigated. And after that, our response work to get the earlier recovery of the society. And then we take the recovery action for the long-term safety. So from the red to purple, this is the reduction of the disaster damage. For that purpose, we also need to take action of the preparedness. So the evacuation, response, and recovery, and preparedness. So in which stage of this disaster management you have already contributed to that stage, or your request to the Earth observation to contribute to each stage. So this kind of discussion we would have after the presentation. And we are requested to take a concerted action among Sendai Framework, SDG, and Paris Agreement. What kind of approach could be taken for promote this concerted action? For example, the Asian Water Cycle Initiative is now promoting the platform on water resilience disaster by archiving the hazard data by archiving damage data and socio-economic data, as well as the hazard data in collaboration among the various the stakeholders. In case of the Philippines, the Dr. Solidam, the co-chaired that platform in collaboration with Undersecretary of the Department of Public Works and Highway, and many department and agency and academia working together for archiving these data and promote the integrated risk assessment. The risk itself is changing from past to future. So this kind of the, identification, monitoring, and prediction is very useful for the policy making and very actionable for community of practice. So this kind of the working together and the co-design and co-produce process in an interdisciplinary way and transdisciplinary way. This is also very useful. So I want to discuss this kind of how can we take a concerted action among the disaster risk reduction and the climate change and the sustainable development goals. So this is my introduction, and I would invite the first presenter, Dr. Renato Solidam. Please.
Good afternoon. I am Renato Solidum of the Philippines Department of Science and Technology, and concurrently the Director of the Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. The Philippines is blessed with many hazards. The Philippines is ranked third among countries exposed to natural hazards and to disaster risk, according to the World Risk Report of 2017. We need to reduce risk to natural hazards and climate change, and we hope to reduce the risk through science, technology, and innovation in collaboration with global, regional, and local partners. Let me first present the organization where I belong. The Department of Science and Technology, or DOST, provides central direction, leadership, and coordination of scientific and technological efforts, and ensures that the results are geared and utilized in areas of maximum economic and social benefits for the people. One of its strategic outcomes is to ensure resilience of communities to natural hazards and climate change. DOST is also one of the 4 vice chairs under the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management System and coordinates the prevention and mitigation pillar. DOST supervises 18 agencies, several of which are principally or partially doing work related to disaster risk reduction. The Institute of Volcanology and Seismology is involved in monitoring, conduct of hazards and risk assessment, and research related to geophysical events, while the Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Service Administration handles monitoring, hazards, and risk assessment related to weather and climate. The Advanced Science and Technology Institute leads in the development of observation sensors and small satellites and facilities that augment the monitoring systems of the geophysical and weather-related agencies. There are also 3 research councils that are also related to disaster risk reduction that finance and coordinate projects related to industry, energy, environment, agriculture, natural resources, and health. The DOST has developed a research and development agenda related to disaster resilience. The agenda considers national disaster risk reduction and climate change action plans and global initiatives such as the Sendai Framework, Sustainable Development Goals, and Paris Agreement. It is divided into 2 major themes, and Earth observation plays a major role in both. The first involves the understanding of risk. Earth observation is important in monitoring and forecasting, in exposure data development, which is one of the big gaps in our statistics globally, hazards and risk assessment, and in warning and risk communication. The second theme is to develop and provide technology solutions, products, and services in the various phases of disaster risk reduction and management and climate change adaptation and mitigation. Earth observation has been used in response and recovery efforts in past disasters in the country. The development of observation and monitoring networks on land, sea, and space is critical for understanding risk. Aside from the improvement of monitoring networks done by the geophysical and weather and climate agencies, the DOST has funded and supervised programs related to the development and deployment of instruments for flood, landslide, and tsunami monitoring. More importantly, we have established a Philippine microsatellite program and pushing for the creation of the Philippine Space Agency now in Congress. In collaboration with Japanese universities and JAXA, the Philippines has developed and deployed 2 microsatellites to observe the country. Diwata-1 more than 2 years ago, and Diwata-2 launched into orbit last October 29, 2018 through Japan's launch vehicle from the Tanegashima Space Center together with GOSAT-2. Diwata-2 will be used for environmental monitoring and rapid post-disaster assessment. The Philippine Earth Data Resource and Observation Center serves as the multi-mission control and satellite data ground receiving station. Data from Diwata-1 satellite and other commercial satellite images have been used in land resource mapping, environmental monitoring, and post-disaster response and recovery. The Philippines has been covered by high-resolution images, such as IFSAR acquired commercially, and by LiDAR mapping through National Research Program funded by the Department of Science and Technology. These have been used for geological and hydrometeorological hazards and land cover and resource mapping, and products are being shared with various stakeholders using various modalities, including web and mobile phone applications. For example, on screen is the fault finder. As you know, Filipinos are fault finders. They want to know where the faults are so they don't establish their houses on them. The next generation project is very important. As more data are being gathered from various efforts, including Earth observations, there's a need to integrate data, have it evaluated, and results shared so decisions at the national to local levels are made with informed basis. The Department of Science and Technology is implementing, through the Institute of Volcanology, the GeoRisk Philippines project, aimed at developing an information hub of accurate and efficient hazards and risk assessment so that stakeholders are well informed and empowered. The next generation mobile app will add on the PHIVOX Fault Finder so that by the tap of the screen of your cell phone, all the hazards that a particular area will be affected with will appear, and we will call it the Hazard Hunter. While various Earth observation networks are being developed or improved in the country, monitoring data or hazards and risk information must be transformed into understandable and actionable information or products and easily accessed through web and mobile platforms so that concerted efforts at the national to community level to reduce risk effectively and efficiently to manage disasters can be done. This entails collaboration and capacity building at various levels, from global, regional, national to local level. We acknowledge that we have learned and continue to learn a lot from our various international partners to make our country and our communities more resilient to disasters. So with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Solidum, focusing on the improvement of the understanding. But I believe your understanding activity is closely related to the Build Back Better and also the preparedness. Okay, thank you. Next, we would like to invite Dr. Nate Smith from NGO. The different standpoint, he is now contributing to the disaster risk reduction. Nate?
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Great. So, my name is Nate Smith. I'm the Director of Technology for the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we use EO data. I think in some ways we're a little bit of we're an NGO, but we also produce some EO data, and I'll talk about that in a second. And hopefully tie back to the Sendai Framework. So, HOT is a major user of EO data. We leverage satellite imagery to digitize into OpenStreetMap. And if you're not familiar with OpenStreetMap, for simplistic sake, it is a free and open exposure database. And I think we're going to bring this up in our discussion about the value and the use of it and the ability of it to serve as a free and open source exposure data set. And so we, like, HOT is an NGO. We're also an online community, and so much of our work is working to generate citizen-generated data for response, disaster response. And so we have over 50,000 volunteers who we can task in 24 hours of response across an area, and split up an area and have multiple volunteers turn a square from clear to yellow to being mapped to being green and validated. So multiple people are looking at and digitizing buildings, roads, all for generating data for response. But so much of our work is known for disaster response, but a majority of our work is around preparedness activities. And so we somewhat follow a remote to field mapping workflow in a lot of our work, with a goal of really creating a complete geographic data globally. We focus on a lot of missing communities on the map. So a place like on the left where you only see a little bit of roads and some streams is actually is on the right, where it's a dense urban part of a city. And so what we, in many of our work, where we help coordinate remote mapping to digitize buildings and roads, and then send teams onto the ground to actually collect and validate and verify key lifeline infrastructure, so points of interest around, let's say, religious institutions or community centers or hospitals or police and fire stations. And so this is a big part of our preparedness activities that we work with partners. Third is we build citizen-generating data partnerships for work across the DRR cycle. So points 1 and 2 don't happen with a bit of a partnership between a government, a national disaster management agency, universities, and a local OpenStreetMap community. And so, for example, in Indonesia, where we've piloted this data partnerships between the BNPB in Indonesia, universities, and the local OpenStreetMap community, where across 3 major cities in Java. Now that the government has taken that on to expand that to 128 priority districts, high-risk districts, as a way to generate both that, really to generate that exposure data set, but then also have the capacity to scale during a response. Yeah, so the key point here is around creating relationships for preparation and for scale. Then on the fourth point is that we do just distribute open EO data through a platform called OpenAerialMap. It's a tool that we develop to help support sharing and distributing unmanned aerial vehicle imagery and any type of aerial imagery, whether that's satellite or hobbyist drone pilots. And you'll see here where, like, the satellite imagery and any type of optical imagery really drives a lot of our activities. And here, OpenAerialMap allows us to get imagery into the hands of responders and into our hands. We use this to be able to pull this directly into OpenStreetMap. Here, this is an example in the Indonesia Red Cross. They do a number of drone flights. They distribute their imagery through OpenAerialMap to make it available, have web services to be able to quickly and easily start using that data. So just as we dive into our discussion, that's a little bit about HOT. I'm going to kind of frame a little bit of what we'll talk about. around two comments. One is leveraging citizen data generating partnerships to implement preparedness activities and strengthen the capacity of response, and that investing in areas where users and partners can collaborate. So these communities like OpenStreetMap have ecosystems of tools that I think complement government data and complement other methods, and these can be strengthened and this can be an important partnership for understanding the risk part of the Sendai Framework. So I'll stop there, and then we can dive into more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. So at this moment, we have the presentation from the government and from the NGO. Sorry. Okay. At this moment, do you have any question to presenter? Okay. So in that case, I would invite the Professor Joy Perara for your presentation, the introduction from your experiences, from the point of view of the science and technology community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Okay. So we were given 5 slides each, and I tried to fill mine, so it might be a little bit painful, so I ask you to bear with me. I come from SIDPRI, from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and I also serve the IPCC as a vice chair in their working group too. And what we do at SIDPRI is that we conduct multi- and transdisciplinary research at national and local levels in ASEAN countries, and we do education and training and master's and doctoral programs, as well as workshops and courses. Outreaching and networking is an important part of our work, where we want to build a cohort of scientists in the region who are supporting their governments in disaster risk reduction. So we work across the climatic, geological, technological hazards through the streams of science and technology, impact, vulnerability, and governance. And we study both the fast and slow onset hazards, which gives us a good position to look into climate-driven hazards. And in terms of our work, we follow what has been set by the government in terms of their disaster management cycle through prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And this allows us to resonate our findings with the way policymakers are thinking about their operational activities. And when we think about climate change, we think about climate change in the current 1-degree world that we are living in today through the prevention, mitigation, and preparedness component. But we are now, after the release of the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees, which indicates very clearly that tropical Southeast Asia is going to bear the brunt of impacts due to the change in climate. If we don't limit global warming to 1.5 or below, we are starting to move towards looking at scenarios of 1.5 degrees and how we will handle that. And in terms of the Earth observation data, we use it to do our susceptibility modeling and risk evaluation, essentially to find out where the hazards will occur so that authorities can take more focused action and deploy assets in the case of the occurrence of a disaster. And in doing our work, bringing in multidisciplinary teams, we had to have a common understanding of what is the scale of information for decision making. And in our country, in our center, we actually have people who come from the physical sciences, the geologists, as well as the GIS personnel, Earth observation people, and such. So in terms of scale of information, we all know that's the general scale of like 1 to 100,000 to 1 to 1,000, which is very detailed. And of course, in terms of coverage, you have a larger area of coverage in a 1 to 100,000 compared to the smallest area that you will have coverage for in a 1 to 1,000 scale. And in terms of types of data, you will have interpreted data, and accuracy would be more enhanced when you have more observed data coming into play. So if you look at the scientific knowledge that comes from EO, there are a variety of things that we utilize. It ranges from the general scale for desktop studies and general surveys to specialized surveys using airborne LiDAR information, as well as field mapping for land use mapping and development suitability assessment in the 1 to 10,000 scale. But then when you come to decision making at the local city level, the city is always making decisions on the lot level, which is about 1 to 5,000 to 1 to 1,000 scale. So this kind of data will come from more evidence-based information like terrestrial LiDAR, the susceptibility investigation, the fields in survey, etc., for local zoning. And you also will rely on a lot on community knowledge, which you will glean out from household surveys. So this cannot be remotely sensed. And crowdsourcing is something that we are thinking about to go, and we are getting prepared to move in this direction, because with crowdsourced information, we from academia can actually put the data in an open source, in an open platform, because that data would belong to us. In most of the Southeast Asian countries, data is not accessible to the public, and this is a barrier to build resilience. So we are looking at ways on how we can overcome this barrier in the region. And one of the pilot studies that's going on in Kuala Lumpur is on disaster resilient cities, led by my colleague from Cambridge, Professor Lord Julian Hunt, who's an atmospheric scientist, and myself. It is funded by the UK Newton Ungku Omar project, because 50% of the funds come from the UK and 50% is put up by the Malaysian government. So we look at downscaling meteorological parameters, precipitation, temperature, humidity, and wind speed. And this component is led by the Meteorology Department of Malaysia, our operational agency, but they also conduct a lot of research, and we are looking at geophysical modeling geophysical hazards such as flash floods and landslides and sinkholes. And this is led by a university in collaboration with the Minerals and Geoscience Department of the country, which is again the national authority for hazards of this nature. And for atmospheric hazards, we have a university private sector collaboration with the Department of Environment, which is another national agency looking at strong winds, urban heat, and air pollution. So the idea is that all of us will bring this to a multi-hazard platform for managing and communicating risks in this changing environment. And this platform will be at the city level, at the City Council of Kuala Lumpur, and it was expected to be operational by end of next year. And we have a lot of capacity building component in there. So essentially, our learning from that particular pilot is that you have your various forecasting modeling components, and in terms of the science, you will do all your scientific work, but in terms of the involvement, you need the government, the technical agencies to come and play a role, the universities, and we have an NGO as well to capture the knowledge so that it can be replicated and transmitted to the communities. And we have also private sector involved in this project. And this project, the findings of it is the steering committee is chaired by the City Hall of Kuala Lumpur, which directs the project. But unfortunately, the conversation has not yet gone to making the information public. So this is for the City Council to manage the disasters in the city and improve their asset deployment in case of a disaster. So in terms of the work at the local level, we have knowledge integration to identify climate and socio-economic drivers, emerging hazards, vulnerability and exposure, which, because this risk framing now allows us to frame both the current and future risks for preventing disasters. And we also have a parallel component that is about the institutional linkages, where the institutions come in to talk about the investment, how they are going to coordinate action in conjunction with the National Disaster Management Agency in implementing the early warning, the land use control, the preparedness, response, recovery, and introduce iterative adaptation. Here's the entry point for that component to come in. And what we find is that our findings can actually go to science policy platforms through our National Science Technology Expert Panel on Disaster Risk Reduction, and through the ASM Disaster Risk Reduction Research Alliance and other platforms, such platforms covering climate change and sustainable development. But most importantly, from the operational level, from the city, you can actually feed this information up to the national focal points. For example, for the Sendai Framework, the National Disaster Management Agency is the focal point for Sendai Framework. The Ministry of Economics is the national focal point for the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Ministry of Energy, Science, Technology, Environment and Climate Change is the focal point for the UNFCCC and IPCC. So in its essence, they look into all aspects of the Paris Agreement. So this is how the information is fed through, and we hope to get a replication, fast replication in other cities in Malaysia and tropical Southeast Asia. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Joy. The very comprehensive framework you have already developed, and also identify the role of each stakeholder in a structured way. Thank you very much. Lastly, we would invite the Dr. Lin Hui, Professor Lin Hui. He's focusing on the urban infrastructure. Thank you very much for your lecture. And the audience, if you want to use this Slido system, I'm not so familiar with this kind of a system, but if you have any question, please use this system and submit your question. Okay, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy here to share some study here. And my name is Hui Lin from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Different from other speakers, and most of us talking about the natural hazard, and here I would like to emphasize those something induced by the human beings ourselves, and actually from the urbanization. And my topic is focused on the urban infrastructure and using the Earth observation system and other technologies to monitoring the health of the urban infrastructure, because those infrastructure, we call this a lifeline of our urban cities. I come from Hong Kong. It's a highly populated city and very high density. And in the last 30 years, and we've seen this kind of change. Actually, in Asia, many countries, I just come from Kuala Lumpur and many other cities, we see the fast urbanization, and we see a lot of investment go to the urban infrastructure. For example, in China, go to the year 2050, and there will be up to 70% of the urbanization, the urbanization rate. And we will see a lot of investment go to the urban infrastructure. Used from the picture, you can see that the upper left corner is Shenzhen. It's 40 years ago. But next to that is currently Shenzhen picture. 40 years, this city, the population from less than 30,000 people, now is over 20 million. It's not only one city. You will see several other cities also, develop in the same area, less than 1 hour driving, this distance. A lot of this kind of infrastructure, for example, you heard, last week, the opening of the longest bridge link Macau and Hong Kong. It's more than 55 kilometers. And also the Asia's largest underground railways open up in Shenzhen. And since a lot of this kind of urban development, the land becomes so limited. And the central government also tried to have a red line set up to protect the farmland and also protect the ecosystems. So many local governments would like to looking for space underground or semi-underground. Or many of this kind of development actually also brings some risk to us. If something happened in the Perivale Delta, you see this kind of a substance and also deformation of the ground of facilities, and cause not only these kind of things. Totally, in Perivale Delta only, the loss economically from this kind of substance deformation is more than 100 billion yuan in this area, and not include other cities. And also some people die because of this kind of deformation. Actually, I see this kind of problem in many other countries. Heard the news from the damage of the bridge in Italy. Actually, 2 years ago in Japanese city, Fukuoka, right, has this JR stations square, substance and collapse, and also cause a serious problem. I think the urban infrastructures need us to pay much more attention and use our Earth observation system to monitoring that. And actually, we can use all this kind of satellite system, not only in the remote sensing satellites and also positioning satellites, together with those sky system and the ground-based system, we can build up this kind of integrated monitoring system. Actually, people are talking about remote sensing satellite, telecommunication satellites, and also positioning satellite integrated together with those ground-based validation system. Then we can cover the whole city. We call the so-called urban CT, just like we do our body check in the hospital once a year to check out general conditions, identify the potential problem. Then more medical doctors can go to more detailed checking. And the city, especially metropolitan city, they are too big, cannot use a traditional way to check out the infrastructure health. We have to use this kind of, we put all these kind of scanning or CT scanners to the satellites to quickly or regularly and large scale, simultaneously check out those health condition of the infrastructure. So we have doing this in Hong Kong. For example, you can see the Hong Kong International Airport, the runway changing color from the green to yellow to red. Actually, this kind of scanning, checking every 2 weeks. We work with Hong Kong International Airport. This airport reclaimed from seawater. They do affected by those tide system, and also airplane landing also hit the ground, cause this kind of substance. Okay, if they continue this kind of happen, it will cause accident, for landing. And the airport is so busy. Every 1 or 2 minutes after landing and departure, we cannot send people to the field to do this kind of monitoring or check-in. Actually, after midnight, they do this kind of thing that don't have the light source. And usually they take weeks, even monthly. Costs $1 million to only do once check-in. But with this kind of remote sensing satellites, we can do this, only less than 4 hours. Even you just use our PC, computers, we can do this kind of calculation very quickly. Our student did this for every 2 weeks. The cost only 1% of a traditional check-in and on the ground. So we are working on with the government now try to propose a new Earth observation system for urban infrastructure. Because many people now live in the urban area, and people actually concerned about the safety. And many cities, especially in China now, a lot of cities started working on underground, a semi-underground project, and people now start to worry about, what's happening. We do need a regular checking out. So I think this from my institute for Space Earth Remote Sensing, Space and Earth Information Science. the Chinese University of Hong Kong. We do have our own satellite station to receive data, training students from different countries to working on this kind of urban CT program. Finally, we think we do need to develop technically not only remote sensing satellite, also work with positional satellite and telecommunication satellites. This kind of technical integration also include ground-based validation system. Then we can almost real-time or semi-real-time to monitoring the health condition of the infrastructure in the city. And we also understand that the partnership between the government, companies, and the university becomes so important. And we also need to enhance this kind of partnership, and hopefully we can easily, actually allow citizens in the city to do have more information about this kind of problem. Actually, recently in Hong Kong, the top news is about one engineering subway from Central to Sha-Tin near our university. They didn't report the problem because this kind of subway construction affect more than 10 buildings. Now it's substantial and bigger, the substance, bigger than the tolerance and the government, the requirement now become the big issue. And the 5 top officers of companies resign. And actually, we got the data start from 2014. This kind of construction already affect, the buildings and the stability. So I think the partnership become very, very important. And also, we also need to pay much attention to rapidly urbanization and all this kind of infrastructure health in the city area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lin. Okay. The importance of the urban infrastructure monitoring and also the satellite space and sky and the ground integrated the monitoring system like a CT. So thank you very much for your input. At this moment, we have 3 questions. The one specific question to Dr. Smith, where the hubs, where does the data come from that is available through open aerial map, and how is the data quality controlled?
Yeah, that sort of easy to answer. Where does the data come from? A lot of different sources. Everything from, for example, in the case of Indonesia, which I was showing, that was from an Indonesian Red Cross, so a trained pilot that I know that they've gone through a training. The Indonesian Red Cross owns their own drone. There's also a lot of hobbyist imagery that's distributed through the platform. The quality control is in the hands of the user right now. So there are no mechanisms at the moment to look at alignment or anything like that. And so it's up to the user and the pilot and the operators to collect quality data. So that's the case it is. Right now.
And also the second question, the licensing. Do you have how do you deal with licensing? And it might be an issue. Okay, so you have experiences.
Okay, so the question is, how do you deal with licensing? It might be an issue if open data can only be reused as open data, a burden of integration with authoritative data. Great question. I think I'll give it a little bit of an example of how people are working with this. So you have some of the largest tech companies, map providers in the world, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, all use OpenStreetMap in their maps. But they also buy a lot of data and use that in their maps as well. And so the way that they're doing this is around how they're making their maps and how they're showing their maps. And so you can combine data sources, different depths of data sources with OpenStreetMap. Now, I think this has been a burden of integration with governments, and in some cases, like pulling in changes from OpenStreetMap. I know in the U.S. A lot of some government agencies just look at what has changed, compare data to OSM, but then continue to create their own data, and so they use it as a little bit of a complementary nature. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what I'll stop there in terms of licensing. The last point I will say is I don't think the open data license should be a barrier to actually using it. And so if you're having one, come talk to me and let's figure out what that issue is.
Okay, thank you very much. And also the specific question to the Dr. Solidan. The Philippines has been hit there often with a very large damage. Okay. No. That one. The question is, what countermeasures have been taken and what measures are most effective? The Philippines has a lot of the serious disaster damage. So, last one, the first one, yes.
Well, as you know, the Philippines has been hit often by many disasters with large damages. And one of the reasons people used to say that they have been affected with simply because they did not know that they can be affected. So the first thing that we did is to do hazards and risk assessment in various scales. But the major problem was the base maps that we use. So we have acquired IFSAR images. We have done a national scale LiDAR mapping. And we use this to do hazards and risk assessment and producing different types of maps and maps of different return periods for different types of hazards. So with this, we are now looking into building infrastructure that would match the scale of the potential hazard in the future. Now, definitely the government has seen the importance of the Earth observation. That's why we have been funded to fly our own satellites and also acquire commercial satellites daily. We have the Earth Receiving Ground Station. Okay,
thank you very much. The other question is really, what I say, to all. For example, you all gave a very good example of how Earth observation is used in your area, as you introduced. Okay. So the question is, what can the GEO community to better support Sendai? In addition, do you need what to the EO community from the Dr. Solidan?
I've been the coordinator of the Sentinel Asia Success Story project in the Philippines, where usually the satellite image providers give the images after a major disaster for appropriate response and recovery. But in this success story, we were given specific images prior to the disaster so that we can develop hazards and risk maps and preparedness plans together with the community so that they are better prepared before the disaster. So I think the GEO community can replicate that in many other countries and strengthen the collaboration. Aside from that, the use of maps are very important, but if the national researchers or practitioners don't know how to use this, then they must be trained. So training, capacity building is also very important.
Okay, not only the disaster charter, but also the data in advance for preparedness, and to make a maximum use of such kind of data, we need the capacity building.
Yes, aside from that, as I mentioned and also mentioned by Nathan here, the development of exposure database is very important in many aspects. So that is very critical. In communities, sometimes they don't know how to read maps. And so when you show them satellite images and identify their particular houses or structures that they know, they better appreciate the hazard and the risk. So those are satellite images for exposure data development would also be very important.
Thank you very much. So, Dr. Smith, do you have a lot of experiences that interpret from the map information for the people's knowledge, the people knowledge for action? Do you have any additional comment there for what the Earth observation community can support more based on your experiences?
Yeah, I think you were just bringing up a point around exposure database, and I think there's maybe a point here around and coming off the license, the question around how OpenStreetMap can be one part of that exposure database as a resource, and so I think learning, training, understanding how to map the way that tagging or attributes are within OpenStreetMap with your models, how you name things. So I think there could be a lot of good work around that to better leverage OSM as a exposure database.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Pereira, thank you very much for your very comprehensive view and also the whole cycle of the disaster management and also the importance of the Earth observation data. And you also emphasize the scale for creation of scientific knowledge and the community knowledge. Thank you very much. In addition, the Earth observation community, how can they support your activity?
All right. I didn't realize I had my own mic. Yeah. Thank you for the question. In terms of what the fit is with from Earth observation data and what's going on the ground at the city level particularly, I think the issue of scale is really, really important. One has to match the decision-making scale to the scale of science. And in the decision-making level, for land use control, you use something in the region of 1 to 10,000, and that normally, in our experience, has not been a good fit when it comes from the Earth observation. Apart from, of course, some techniques are better than others, but satellite observation is not really found to be that useful, and particularly for development control. So city planners need to use that. And what we have, we really would like to see, like in our experience working with the data custodians of the country, getting data easily on terms of the air quality control and such, and not being able to share that with the community that is at risk is really a painful process to go through. So what we are doing now is to actually shadow this process that we are doing in the pilot using only open access data and comparing it to the results of using the real data sets. And all the data custodians in our pilot, they know that the community has to know this information, and but they are unable to share this because the structure is such that the governance structure is such that they would get into trouble for doing that. So we are benchmarking it, but using entirely open source data so that we can share it with the Kuala Lumpur community. But at the same time, we have convinced the City Hall to bring in the NGOs to actually focus on areas that are most susceptible to certain types of hazards, to build a community resilience, because we have empirical evidence that a community that is aware of the disaster will be more prepared and take more preventive actions. So if you want me to urge for something, it would be that if there is some way to find socio-economic databases to feed into our exposure and vulnerability and risk assessment framing, that would be really wonderful. And crowdsourcing would be the way to go. If that could be emphasized to bring in information, particularly in areas where information is not easily accessible to the public. And in terms of the good practices, in most cases in Malaysia, what we have found is that the EO data is actually used for a survey after a disaster happens. And then what happens is they say, oh, this is not a good area and why it's not good. It's all very retrospective in the country. So, but we have had one good example, again, is after post-retrospective, where the Minerals and Geoscience Department did a survey and then did a more detailed assessment to move indigenous community away from a hazard-prone area. So that is a case study where they managed, the technical operational agency convinced the decision maker to move a community away and invest in new houses and such for that community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Professor Ling, do you have any? You are the remote sensing person. That's why. How can you add the Earth observation value in the urban health, urban infrastructure health monitoring?
Thank you. Actually, we have been working on so-called large-scale man-made linear feature monitoring in last 20 years. Include like Tibet Railway, those areas, no people there on duty to maintain, the area. We do need this kind of Earth observation system to help us to monitoring, because the railways pass through the so-called frozen zone. Those soils in the summer and the winter, they are changing. The not stable. Later on, and we find out, the urban area actually need more attention, and we have seen this kind of problem not only in China, Hong Kong, and Korea, Japan, and other Southeast Asia country. Urbanization is so fast now, and the infrastructure deformation problem caused by different factors. Some maybe the geological issue, some from material, some from design, and some even caused by corruption, right? So all this kind of a problem happen in developing countries. We have to pay attention to that. So we do need this kind of partnership, not only our remote sensing scientists, we also need people like civil engineering, and those experts join us to interpret this kind of problem. And of course, plus this kind of partnership with government, even we need a third party, this kind of commercial company to help out. Because from university, sometimes, when we release the information, and even government not happy about that. We even receive a formal letter from a government to just like warning us, don't publish this in the local newspaper. Maybe it's some big developers behind that, they're interested about housing price. So we do need, find out some kind of, as like Singapore, you do have a, the law system, open data, all these kind of things, and the citizens, they do have the rights to know, so what's happening. So this kind of partnership law system should be, built up to, allow all these kind of technologies, that can help, citizens, decision makers to get more information about what's happening. Because all this infrastructure do like our human body, they do have a lifespan, right? They do have some time, they can build up, sometimes they can decay, or some kind of caused by different problems. We do need like a regular, health checking. Use, we call the urban cities style. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the, not only the after the disaster, but the before the disaster, for support the preparedness and the design of the urban structure, for example. So such kind of support and Earth observation data should be connected with exposure and vulnerability to identifying the risk. Such kind of the connection should be supported. And the partnership is to promote such kind of the activity. That we need to promote partnership, including the engineering. So such kind of the discussion is very key. And at this moment, this is closely related to the second request from Ms. Mizutori. That is the our contribution to fill the gap of the statistics of each country. That is the requested to the our Earth observation community, and also each country need to be prepared and maintain and report. So Earth observation how can Earth observation contribute to fill the gap of the statistics?
Oh, there are many ways by which Earth observation can fill the gaps. We must have before or pre-disaster and post-disaster images of areas that will be affected. We know this already. So together with the ground-based exposure database gathering, we can easily do that. But in particular, to make sure that we monitor the efforts that we use to reduce risk and to combat climate change. For example, the Department of Budget and Management of the Philippines, that provides all the money that we use, have requested the Department of Science and Technology, one of its agencies, to provide funding or to lead the coordination of a group of people who will monitor all the big ticket projects of the country that are being constructed or being implemented, either be it roads, bridges, reforestation, agriculture. So we are actually monitoring those that are doing this, both public and private contractors, so that the government can easily get hold and monitor the actual output on the ground. So aside from this, we're looking into establishing many indicators for the statistics for risk and loss and damages, together with the UNISDR, and various organizations are contributing to this. But we also rely heavily on Earth observation, especially in remote areas where we don't have very good access.
So in addition to the ground-based data, which is controlled by government, but especially remote area, it's very difficult to cover. Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Smith?
Can you repeat, what was the specific question? The contributions to statistics.
The statistics of the government or local government. The fills the gap of the statistics. That is the request from the Ms. Mizutori. The Earth observation, or the Earth observation combined with your OpenStreetMap information. Does it contribute to the national statistics of or local statistics of the disaster?
Okay, I think I understand what you're kind of getting at. So I guess I'll talk a little bit about an example and a challenge that maybe we've been kind of dealing with that might spark some discussion. So in one example here is in a number of countries, we've worked with a partner, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, around collecting kind of baseline, doing it essentially a census of data, a household census, collecting the baseline data for malarial elimination programming. So they want to know the denominator of all the houses that are in a district. And so this is working with the Ministry of Health in Botswana, and so over the course of 6 weeks, they collected all the buildings in one district, and so through this process, they're collecting all the information about the house, kind of publicly identifiable information, but then they're also doing a household survey as well, and starting to collect that kind of census, that statistics information, and so here's a challenge, I think, for the community is that you have this open data set that you're not storing publicly identifiable information, but then you also are running household surveys or some type of demographic health survey that are connected to those data points, and so being able to manage the two data sets can be a challenge. And I'm not saying that we have the answers to it at all, but that's something that would like to work with anyone here on that and kind of think through, okay, how do you have this open data set that is in the census in somewhere areas with more private and publicly identifiable information.
One question there from this system to you, what will be the plan to prioritize the area, to digitize, to be a complete global database for?
I saw that question. I didn't fully understand what the question was getting at, like the plan to prioritize. I think this depends on the area. We work with a lot of partners, and they help give direction on like what are the priority areas to be focused on. If in many cases, sometimes the priority is there's no data, there's nothing on the map, and so we want to start to build that baseline, and I think that's a good starting point for kind of prioritizing areas.
Based on the needs of the people, the area.
Right. Well, and I think part of it is putting those communities on the map is a first step in terms of putting their baseline information, kind of infrastructure data on the map is a good way to start.
Okay, thank you very much. So Professor Pereira, you have already developed the science and policy platform and operational platform. Then your output could contribute to maintain the statistics of the. So do you have any? Can you share your idea with us?
Absolutely. In CITPRI, what we do is we are actually providing the technical support to our National Disaster Management Agency to develop the baseline data for the Sendai monitor. So I'm not aware of the UN escape such activities because our institution started getting involved in this after Sendai framework. We were helping them with the Hyogo framework monitor, and now we are doing the Sendai monitor now with them, and there's a baseline data collection. We are checking indicators. We have had like some 6 national workshops under the aegis of the National Disaster Management Agencies to see where the data is located, what kind of systems we can put in place for routine reporting. So this is what we are doing, and we have submitted for the first few targets already in the Sendai monitor that has been uploaded, and we are working closely with them on this aspect. And on terms of the, I saw a question on the citizen scientists, their role. What can they do? Our vision in CITPRI is that once we identify the susceptible zones, you alert the community can actually monitor, for example, signs of failure that will come very much earlier for slope failure and landslides. And you can just tell them what to monitor, and this can all be done, and they can take pictures and send it to you, and we can verify that. So these are things that early warning that can be done, but there must be an entity to actually screen out the information and validate that as well, and cross-check that. So we are now preparing as an institution to take up that role, and once we pilot that role and it is done, I think what we can do is actually transfer that to the private sector to be done routinely or as a part of a CSR activity or such. That's our vision. And in terms of back to the statistics, economics data is a real problem, and we are actually conducting some work in the city of Kuala Lumpur to see how much of the GDP the city has actually lost over the years, the cumulative GDP. And once we now identify the susceptible zones, we can project for the city how much they can expect to lose in the worst case scenario. So that's the direction that we are taking, so that the city can make informed decision on where's the asset, where are their assets, what's the supply chain like, and such. And more importantly, this is more, we want the insurers to come into play, And so that because the government can then put in a good look into the issue of premium and cover the bottom 40% who will never afford insurance, so that we can have cross subsidies once we identify these zones. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. The one point you mentioned, the economic loss, the need to be identified, quantified. For quantifying the economic loss, the possible loss, due to the disaster, in that case, specifically Earth observation can contribute to the estimate of the economic loss. In which way? What kind of the approach of the
So at this point in time, we are using data from the City Council of Kuala Lumpur. So we haven't yet, we've looked at how much they have spent on redoing buildings. These are all evidence-based. We are going through all their previous reports. That's what our researchers are doing. And what our economist has developed is a way of looking at the different aspects of loss associated with a particular hazard. In the case of ponding, which is flash flood, but less than half an hour, we have a lot of water ponding problems. So what happens when you have water ponding? What would be the investment if you were to clean up that? Which are the areas you have to focus on to clear up your drains so that water ponding doesn't happen? And then what is the losses? Looking at the traffic in the area, the productivity, loss of productivity, looking at the intangible impacts of this water ponding issue. So that's what our economist is doing on the project.
Okay.
Yeah, but we haven't come to Earth observation. I'm sure we'll find a way to connect the dots at some point.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Lin, you are now develop a monitoring system of the urban infrastructure health. How can we get the information into the statistics of the disaster? Or can we identify some connection?
Yeah, I think it's a good topic for further studies for us as university professors. I think currently when we report our data to government, for example, for these Earth surface stabilities, sometimes they don't have data. Sometimes they do have data, right? For some remote sensing or data, we can help them to fill the game. For some of them that even don't have data, okay? So I think remote sensing, in general speaking, we can more quantitatively to help out to modify, the final report and help out to narrow down the gap between, different government units. Then for us, for the urban infrastructure, most time they do have the ground checking, but the data sometimes not released. I think our research actually can put pressure to two sides. One is we think they are going to in the future the urban city government from the construction standard, from the maintenance regulation, from materials. Right, they all need to probably follow some kind of standard. For example, if we are trying to check out those deformation, they may in the future, like infrastructure, need to install like corner reflectors, allow radar data image can be validate, right? Then we'll have a real-time, long-time series data, to support our study. Second thing, in the future, will affect the satellite. The company or government, when they design new satellites, design sensors, they design the orbit, right? They can also follow up, for example, currently we're using Cosmo from Italian and Terrestrial from Germany, as companies. So they do have a so-called resolutions. They also have a temporal resolution, how quickly they revisit the same city. So in the future, so all this I think when we talk about disaster, the Sendai Framework, the one principles is about risk early warning. We are not doing things after disasters. We should pay attention to before disaster. So early warning will be a key issue for us. How can we, really tell what may happening, right? So we may also think about the Earth observation system could be give us this kind of capability to do this kind of early warning. So satellite design and also the urban systems should be also be modified. Without human being, people, those things will be just a natural phenomenon. Flood, volcano. Since we have people there, then we call flood disaster, right? The volcano problem. So urban area is focus. So many people there. We really need to pay attention. Right?
Okay, thank you. One specific question to you. Did you try to monitor the deforming buildings in Hong Kong in practice?
Yes.
Yes.
Recently, we report to government that I just mentioned about that there's a subway, the building subway from center of Hong Kong to Sha Tian. The company did not release the data. We report to government about this kind of subway underground construction affect more than 10 buildings. They have become dangerous. This will be a serious problem. We also give some data to Macau government, but Macau government give us a formal letter. Professor Lin, don't release any data to local newspaper. I think it's the big developers behind that, and I don't know. So that's why I mentioned about the partnership. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the one information from the Dr. Scott. This one. There is a body of work by the UN in developing disaster-related statistics with a report to be tabled to Statistical Commission in March 2019. This is ongoing activity. Thank you very much, Dr. Scott. Anyway, our discussion is how can we mean the Earth observation community contributing to this kind of the work. So thank you very much. So last question, but the only one sentence, okay, one phrase, something. Miss Mizutori's the first question. Each country is requested to submit the national local strategy for DRR by 2020. How can Earth observation community contribute to such the report of from each country? From the point of view, could you please introduce your idea? One sentence or 1 minute talk, okay? Dr. Solidan?
Well, the Department of Science and Technology and my organizations, where I supervise, the Weather Bureau and Geological Agency, have collaborated with many groups to define the science and technology and research and development agenda, which is actually aligned to the Sendai Framework. And we are also the vice chair of the Prevention and Mitigation Pillar and part of the System for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we are part of the planning group for the strategy that will be submitted. So definitely what I have presented will be part of the strategy, including the Earth observation, for monitoring, for hazards and risk assessment, for post-disaster assessment, especially the post-disaster needs assessment and damage assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Smith?
My statement is leveraging partnerships between universities and OpenStreetMap communities has yielded results for better disaster preparation.
Thank you very much. Professor Pereira?
In terms of my understanding is how to achieve target E. So in Malaysia, we have recommended to the National Disaster Management Agency that they develop a disaster risk profile, and they have budgeted for it. And I think Earth observation data will be the first step to be used for delineating all the different types of hazards in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay, in addition to partnership of government, university, and industry, I hope to see more industry involvement and the third party, their contributions to, because sometimes government, university, they are not represent the real citizens' benefits. Okay, and we may need to introduce a new mechanism and the system to keep this kind of information available, and also actually the industry can help and will help more in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We are very happy to have this opportunity by having the representative of the government and a representative from NGO and representatives from the academia. They introduced the very fruitful and their experiences, and also the idea and share their experience and idea with us. So really informative, and then we also discuss, in addition, what do we need to do? Mainly 2 points. So Earth observation community need to cover not the one aspect, but a holistic way, from the preparedness to the recovery, and also not only the science data, but also the usability by people. So such kind of the holistic data and information sharing we need. The other one is a partnership. The government and NGO and science and technology and the people and society and people, the partnership should be strengthened. And we are very happy to have Stephen for your some summary note. Thank you very much.
So first of all, please, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. So this was by far the most comprehensive panel because we didn't have a keynote speaker, so there's a lot more information. So I've tried to summarize it around a lot of the different themes. The first one is, you heard many times people talking about the different elements of the disaster cycle, the different phases. So from preparedness or prevention, preparedness, response and recovery. And one of the opportunities there is the work that UNISDR is doing on the Global Risk Assessment Framework. So GEO is already contributing to that. There are a number of people from the GEO community who are already on the team working on it. Again, the GEO community can work together in terms of looking at these risk trends and work on the national and local DRR strategies. So something that hopefully will come up in the Sendai subgroup within the program board, looking at how the work of GEO can contribute there. And then there was this point about filling gaps where in official statistics. There is an activity that GEO is already contributing. It's the one that Greg Scott highlighted, which is actually going to the Statistical Commission next year, so to StatCom. So it's being led by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, with the Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific, with contributions from UNGGIM and UNISDR, as well as some of us in Geneva from the GEO Secretariat. So some of that work's been done on disaster-related statistics. There's also some similar work being done on climate change-related statistics as well, if anyone wants more information on that. Then there was a lot of talk about the discussion around risk is changing, and I think if you saw some of the examples from Lin Hui, some big numbers, some big impact, lots of infrastructure stuff, and looking at how we can, this concept within the Sendai framework of building back better. So Earth observation data and information can feed into that as well. There's an area to, Professor Koike's last point was around partnership, and that's something that came up a lot. So there's areas where the users and partners can collaborate with this humanitarian OpenStreetMap data and other citizen-generated data to leverage these partnerships and, again, look at different phases within the disaster cycle. And then finally, in situ observations was mentioned once more. We've heard a lot over the other panel sessions about the importance of in situ observations, and there should be links between these different activities and in situ observations, and the work programme, I have said, should reflect this, but hopefully does reflect this. So, thank you once again for enabling such a rich conversation. I was told I have a strange Scottish accent, so I'm going to use different words to say coffee is now available. Not there's no coffee, there is coffee and it's available. So if you want to go to the exhibition area again, please be back here for 4 p.m. where we will commence the future of GEO with the results-oriented GEOS with Professor Dr. Gilberto Camara. Thank you very much.
I'll clarify. The NOAA program has so many projects. So the LiDAR and exposure mapping program